On this edition of Looking Back, West Virginia veterans recount their experiences on D-Day. I'm Dave Lewis, helping to keep you informed on the Library Television Network.
We got off that ship on D-Day, June 6, 1944, and a small landing craft. It held 30 men. There were 3 rows of them, and 3 rows of 10 each. And I was the 3rd man from the rear and the center. Now, on the right rows, 2 rows, on each side, there was a piece that come across as over the top of the men that was in them rows, and I was an open part of it. And we were lowered into the water 20 minutes after 3 on the morning of June the 6th, 1944, and we went around, got out there in the water a little ways, and went around in circles while the ships, they had supposedly, what I was told, they had special built rocket ships that shelled that beach. And of course the airplanes went over inland and dropped bombs on the Germans, and then of course they had paratroopers that went inland and dropped bombs. And of course they had gliders that went inland. Now whether gliders went in before day or not, I don't know. But they were, glider troops went in there on that day too. So we got out there until they shelled the beach, and when they opened fire with all their ships, them rocket ships, and shelling that beach, it was lighted up like day. And from, you could see all around, and us out there in them small craft, well, I don't know, we were there possibly 2 or 3 hours, but till it began to break day. When we was off there at 20 after 3, probably a couple of hours we were out there before we started in. We were probably maybe 12 or 1,500 feet or yards, maybe yards out to when we got off and got out between that and where we hit the beach. But when we started in on when we started in, we got in, and we got out there a good distance, and to where we were fired on by machine gun fire. I saw a little boy from Virginia that I knew that we got with us there in England, probably about 20 years old, by the name of Cecil Reed. And I saw him, he'd been shot. And I knew at this time that he had been shot, and at about that instant, this British SEAL rolled over in among us, and it's just like saying 1, 2, 3, and at that time, we hit this mine. And when I went down and came up, I came up in a ball of fire. All that gasoline was on that ship ignited, and I had inflated my life preserver. And I remember some guy grabbed me around the waist. I never did know who he was, and I kicked him loose as I went to the side. And I went over and I got on a piece of the float of the boat, and it was on top of the water there, and I just jumped on in, and you do what you automatically you do things. But when I went down and I come up, the day I die, I won't be any near closer to death than I was that day, because I remember I said, Lord, this is death. And I thought that I was a goner, but I never quit making the effort to get to land. And when I jumped in, then the waves was a coming in, the tide was a coming in, and carried me right on in to the beach. Well, I know that 5 of our men got killed in the boat that I was in, and I know that both British sailors got killed, but I don't know how many more. And the rest of them, I don't know how many out of the other 25 that would have been killed, but I know after I was there for 8 weeks later, I know that I was in a rehab hospital and in a hospital for almost a year after I got wounded, which I will explain to you as I go along, that I run into a boy that I saw on the beach there that day, and it was flickers of skin rolling off of his face about 1 inch wide, and I run into him at Cape Atterbury, Indiana, where I was discharged, and I hadn't saw him from that day to then. The only person I ever saw that was in the, no, I'll take that back. I did see one man I went to see him that I knew was after the war. But this boy, this young man was at the beach, and his face was very scarred. That was the second one that I saw after I got back. But anyway, when we got on the beach, we had one little boy by the name of Bra Charlie, a little Italian boy. He was out there, and you could hear him holler on, you know, when he was and he was going down to come up a time or two and gotten on a piece of that boat, I guess. But anyway, we had a man there that wanted to ask. I heard him ask the company commander about stripping off and going out and getting him. He said, "No, it's better to lose one man than it is two." So anyway, when we hit that beach, we were wearing. They had given us OD clothes, a shirt and trousers with treated for gas. It's like sort of like having sugar water. Felt like it on your clothes. And I had them on the day I hit the beach, and I had them on the day I got my leg broke hitting the bombing 8 weeks later. Well, I got both of my hands blistered across the top, and my left ear was blistered, and they put sulfur powder on me and put patches on my hands and on my ear, and I got my hair singed there that day. But I went on. I never went back. And I went on then, and we went through the hedgerows and the fighting of the hedgerows and through Normandy and to 7. That was the rough spot there that we had to hit through. But what we had to go through was to move the Germans back as we went along. We had the artillery behind us, and we had on the strong resistance, and we had the airplanes would go over and bomb in front of us and bomb them places, strong points, and bomb everything that was loose to bomb, and that they could see to bomb. And then the artillery would open up on them and move them out, and we would move forward. As I saw it at that time, I might have thought back years ago, maybe they did have the wars, maybe World War I, where they would have a lot of hand-to-hand conflict. We never had much hand-to-hand conflict. What most we run into was sniper fire. But what we got mostly was, most of the thing that we were troubled with, as far as where we was concerned, was strafings and bombings of bombing personnel and things like that, and artillery fire. As I remember, you get beyond fright. You don't really, you're not even excited about it. You're not even frightened at anything. It don't bother you anymore. You get to where that you think this is it, and you've got to go through with it, and you're going through with it, and you're not scared. But you never get beyond that. You get to where those that you never get to where you won't try to survive. But I think you get beyond fright to where it don't bother you.
The dawn of that day came on June 6, 1944. Allied armies, troops of the United States, Great Britain, the Dominions, and forces of the men who had escaped from the occupied countries, all under the supreme command of General Eisenhower, set out by sea and air for Normandy.
We boarded a ship in Weymouth Harbor. His Majesty Javelin was the name of the ship. And I was on the 4th, I guess. And we was ready to go on the 5th, and the weather was so bad we couldn't go, so they delayed it till the morning of the 6th. And then sometime during the morning we sailed over to the coast and loaded, I don't remember what time, probably 5:30 or so, we loaded in the landing crafts and lowered back in the water and circled around till everybody got ready to go. And time come to go, the water was rough. It was real rough. I expect we got about halfway in and we almost sunk. We had to take our helmets off and bail the boat to keep from sinking. And it was so rough they couldn't land you in the right place. It was so rough. So they landed us in the wrong place, right at Bearville Draw. And there's all big pillbox there, big seawall, and the whole mountain behind us was tunneled out with machine gun nests. Must have been 30 or 40 in there. And anyhow, they run us in the English landing craft, and them Englishmen, they won't run you up to the shore. They'll dump you off in neck-deep water so they can turn around and get away. Well, they dumped us all off. And everybody went out the front of the boat. Just was killed automatically. And one of my buddies made it, and I made it, and there was 3 of us made it. The other one went over the side of the boat and started in. And they had unloaded 2 amphibious tanks there on the beach, and they was both knocked out. So some of us was getting behind the tank for protection, and they got so many around there, 7 or 8 behind it. I said, that's a sure target to get hit, you know, you bunch that many up in one place. So I got underwater and I went, it was probably 100 to 150 feet over to another tank, got behind it. And I no more than got over there, they blowed this tank up and all them behind it, killed all them. So I thought, buddy, I better get away from this tank. So there's all kind of obstacles on the beach. There was low tide, and the tide was rising in, so and a lot of the obstacles was underwater, but going up close to the beach was some old logs that they had put in to wreck a boat. And I managed to go underwater and get over behind one of them logs. And I stayed there till the tide got so high it washed me off of it. Probably was in the water, I imagine, 2 hours. And finally got in. We lost everything we had. We never had nothing. You had to get rid of everything, keep from drowning. We didn't have a thing. And anyhow, there was 3 of us made it onto the seawall. And at that time, somebody knocked the big pillbox out, the big 88 in it. I don't know what hit it. Something knocked it out. But we had protection from all the mountain and the machine gun at that time. And some engineers way down the beach had got in without any resistance much, and they come up there and they stacked TNT again, that seawall. I think they said it was 500 pounds, and blowed a hole in that seawall big enough to get through. And we got through that. Wasn't very many of us left. We got through that, and at the end, after you got through the seawall, it was the end of that mountain there at Bearville Draw. And we had the tunnels and doors going in there, so we got up there, and them fellas all held their white flags out. I think there's about 30 come out of that mountain that had been killing all of us. And they wanted to take them prisoner. I wouldn't have took them prisoner myself. They done killed all us. But they figured it was worth more to them as for information than would be to kill them. So they took all them prisoners. And then, it was long about noon by that time. Late that evening, we got on up the mountain and went on to the little town of Bearville. Bearville up there, and dug in there for the night. And poor French people, they didn't have anything to eat. Them women would milk a cow and bring you out a glass of milk. And we didn't have anything either. I never had anything with me to eat for 2 or 3 days. And we just kept on going through hedgerow country for, you know, a little bit each day. I don't know where we was at the second night, or don't have any idea. It flooded the land. It was all, you wading water up to your knees everywhere. And, we went on, kept on going. We started towards the west. But, we got down to a little, we got down to St. Clair. And in the Army, you have the first scout one day and the second scout, and you change about every day. And the first scout goes out as far as he can go and still sees the second scout and give hand signals to either get down or come on. Well, that morning we left St. Clair, I was first scout, and I got all across a big field, 1/4 of a mile, and they started shelling me with mortar shells, and that hit me there. And I couldn't move. And directly a medic come up to try to help me. And every time he'd raise up to help me, while they'd shell some more, he couldn't help me. And then later on, they quit shelling, and he started taking my shoe off. I said, "Wait a minute, you're taking my foot and all off." And I said, "Cut that shoe off." So he cut it off and put a tourniquet around me, and they put me on a cot face down, and carried me out to a field hospital. And that tourniquet always was hurting me. So I loosened it. I didn't know I needed it. I loosened it. And I was laying downhill, face down on a stretcher, and after a while I noticed blood running clear up and coming up to my neck out from under that stretcher. Anyhow, I didn't bleed to death. They took me on to the field hospital, put a cast on it. I never was scared or worried about it. A lot of my buddies had the feeling they'd never make it, but that never entered my mind. Never worried about it at all.
Well, the first experience, of course, it was all very new and all very interesting and probably all very confused, but our objective was to establish a water purification point at Vallones off Utah Beach. And this was in an apple orchard that had been pinpointed prior to our ever getting there. We did that fine and got the water purification unit established to where we were being able to supply water to the troops and so forth. And this was, we probably got it in operation, I would say, about noontime on the first day we were there. And we did fine that afternoon and that night. And the next day, okay. But there was an observer someplace that informed the Germans where the water point was. The second night they wiped it out. So that that ended that. And then we were there for a couple more days before moving on to an area down like towards St. Lo and St. Mary Glees and that area to repair bomb damage to highways so they could be used, and also repair if we could, any bridges that were damaged so they could still get heavy equipment and so forth across them. And then that, and doing at the same time we had units that were also repairing railroad bridges so that as soon as possible they'd be able to be used for supply lines. And so we were held up at times, didn't move as quickly as we wanted to because of either enemy activity or activity that had transpired before we got there, such as flooding of the lowlands and things like that. But then that's about what happened at that particular time. Then we went on from there into and on like toward Paris and this central part of France into that area. So it was, as I say, it was all very interesting and new and so forth. I don't know if we accomplished everything that we were supposed to. Probably some we didn't and some we did. So, but anyhow, we came out on the right end anyhow. And we also was at Cherbourg after it was liberated to pick up confiscated engineer equipment that the Germans might have had there, and then to help establish a harbor at Cherbourg where they could, where supply ships could get in, a breakwater and so forth, where they could get into shore and unload. And then those supplies, of course, came down the peninsula and on into central France. In any situation like that, you would first be apprehensive if you were going to, we had no, if we want to go back to the landing on Utah Beach, the section where we landed, we had no resistance whatsoever. There was, the only danger you had was of maybe falling down and drowning before you could get up again or something, but no enemy resistance. But even having been told and trained and been in different maneuvers and so forth, the amount of destruction, the destruction of the towns and so forth was unbelievable until you could see it. Then when you saw it, you'd have to believe it. But of course, the towns along the coast had been shelled from the ships. They'd also been bombed, and prior to D-Day, and so it was just I don't know, it was just kind of awesome, the the amount of destruction that had been, I'd say, perpetrated on the French people and so forth. And there was, in the fields where there had been artillery shells exploded and so forth, there was a lot of dead cattle. And I know that one thing that was something that you couldn't believe, living like we do or have been privileged to in America. But the townspeople that were from the small towns that were courageous enough to get out. Now, I guess when you get hungry, you get more courageous, but I presume for food. And there was cattle and so forth that had been laying for probably several days in these fields, and they were coming out with their little two-wheel carts and hopping the fence and cutting up the cattle and taking the meat back to be cooked, or I presume if it wasn't spoiled, whatever. But that's when we're used to going to the grocery store and getting what we want. It's hard to understand that people, because of war, or have to live that way or exist that way. And these are, you kind of feel sorry for them, and then all at the same time you wonder, well, if somebody here that I'm feeling sorry for didn't tell somebody else where our water point was, that was wiped out at the end of the second day of its operation. But it was, I don't know, it's been a long time ago, of course, and it's hard to describe. I guess the greatest feeling was going ahead and doing what you were supposed to do, and still being around to do it. We had some strafing attacks and some light bombing from the Germans, but nothing that really amounted to anything. The only thing that bothered us was the fact that they knew exactly where we were and what we were doing. And, but that was mostly the case with, I think, all the way through.